Hey, what's up guys, Smashheads here. Basically there's this show I've been watching for around a year or so called ER. If you haven't heard of it, it was a pretty successful primetime medical drama in the US, which ran from 1994 till 2009 and focuses on daily lives in an ensemble cast of doctors, nurses and medical students. As the name suggests, it focuses mainly on doctors working in the emergency medicine department, but it also often dabbles in surgery, pediatrics and even psychiatry. Now, why do I want to talk about this particular show? Well, mainly for two reasons. One, my mum was a big fan of the show when it originally aired and owns the entire box set, so watching it was almost like a family tradition. And two, I haven't seen anyone talk about it on YouTube, like, at all. Well, apart from actual doctors reacting to them, but that's less review and more let me make fun of this medical drama for not being medically accurate. Okay, just kidding. But I feel like since I've been watching this show for quite a while, I've gotten to know the characters quite extensively as they come and go, as well as my general obsession with it, I feel like I'm qualified to talk about the show extensively. When I dabbled a bit on ER in my QA video, I mentioned how the quality dropped during the last few seasons. Don't get me wrong, I think the show is absolutely amazing, especially during the early seasons. The mid-seasons were kinda sluggish at times to some boring characters, but are still charming overall. The late seasons were not terrible, but it tried way too hard to mimic Grey's Anatomy and its melodramatic style of writing, which I find very strange because ER came out 11 years before Grey's. Anywho, we won't be focusing on these seasons. This video is about the very first season, which ran from 1994 to 1995. Now before we get started, let me give you a brief synopsis on the main ensemble cast. In this season, there are 6 main characters: Dr. Mark Green, Dr. Doug Ross, Dr. Susan Lewis, John Carter, Nurse Carol Hathaway, and Dr. Peter Benton. Dr. Mark Green is a chief resident of the ER department. Throughout the series, he acts as a mediator and authority figure. He's a skilled and hard-working doctor who still has lots of empathy towards patients. Everyone looks up to Green as he is very likable. You could easily say he was the lead role throughout the good run of the show. Dr. Doug Ross is a pediatric fellow and a very good friend of Mark's. Like Mark, he's a very skilled doctor, but unlike Mark, he's very abrasive and temperamental and often lets his emotions get in the way of his judgment. This is mostly the case with domestic abuse situations, even going as far as to get around suspected abusers. He also has a pretty reckless personal life, including being a serial womanizer. Well, to be fair, who could resist George Clooney? Okay, moving on. Dr. Susan Lewis is a second-year resident in the ER department. She's a young and very eager doctor, but has a lot of trouble asserting herself during the first season, which is taken advantage of as you'll see later. John Carter is a third-year medical student who is just starting his clinical rotations. He's mentored by Dr. Peter Benton, who constantly berates him throughout the season. His skills do need work, but I have hope for the young boy. He's gonna do well. Nurse Carol Hathaway is a nurse manager of the ER department, but not for long maybe, ooh? And Dr. Peter Benton, a very eager and cocky second-year surgical resident who always tries to wiggle his way up the surgical ladder by gaining more experience on more complicated surgical procedures. I implied this earlier when explaining Carter, but while Benton has very good doctor skills, his people skills need a lot of work.
Excuse me, I feel a little...
Oh, that's okay, I didn't need you anyway.
Okay, now onto the first ever episode, but before that I'm about to give a spoiler alert for the entirety of Season 1 and a content warning for medical gore and disturbing themes. Episode 1, Pilot, 24 Hours. The very first scene highlights the busy lifestyle of an ER doctor perfectly. Or at least I think, I'm not an actual doctor. But it does a very good job at introducing the characters and their roles while highlighting their busy lifestyles. As Dr. Green is woken up by one of the nurses to work up his friend and fellow colleague Dr. Ross, he almost sleepwalks past the barricades of patients, doctors, staff, etc. to get to the very drunk Doug. As Green fixes up Doug, we see the chemistry between them as well as the conflict in their personalities. Doug is the much more reckless type, while Mark is a lot more the professional and laid-back type. After he fixes him up, he goes back to bed only for his shift to start a moment later. We get our first trauma when around 12 critical patients come in from a collapsed building. This is where we get to see doctors like Benton and Ross in action. Benton tries to haggle his way into an interesting surgical procedure, but to no avail due to his inexperience. Green soon after visits his wife Jennifer and his daughter Rachel in the cafeteria, and they talk about his upcoming interview for a private practice job. Later, we see a young medical student named Don Carter who is about to start his first ER rotation. Being his mentor, Benton gives him a quick fire tour of the emergency department. During that scene, it helps show the chemistry and personalities of those two characters, mainly Peter's cockiness and arrogance, and Carter's naivety and lack of experience. The first two patients he helps treat are a woman with a hand laceration and a police officer with a self-inflicted bullet wound to the leg. In this next scene, Dr. Ross is seen interacting with the nurse Hathaway. It gives further background on the character's past when Dogg talks about how good things were when they were together, and Hathaway isn't buying any of that crap. Meanwhile, Carter helps a woman give birth at the hospital, and has a weirdly satisfied look on his face. Green visits a private practice place his wife was harping on about earlier. Despite the fact that the office better pay and is much less stressful, Green still prefers a much more energetic environment at County Hospital, because that's where his true passion lies. Dr. Lewis talks to her patient, Mr. Parker, about a mass was detected in his lungs during an X-ray. She tries to dissuade his fears of potential lung cancer by saying it could easily be something else and that he'd have to take a further test for a more accurate diagnosis. The patient feels like Dr. Lewis is bending the truth to protect him in a sense, and asks for a frank diagnosis.
Your history of coughing blood, red nose. This X-ray is suggestive of cancer. The diagnosis has not been confirmed, and reiterate well these laws. None of those suggest any conclusions until now.
Carter treats a young woman who crashed his dad's recent expensive car and is fearful of how he may react. I know it's been a quite bit of comedic relief, mainly with Carter, but trust me, you'll fucking need it for what's about to happen in a few moments. Anyway, Benton scolds Carter for not treating enough patients, and Carter goes to see a teenage girl with pregnancy symptoms, but insists that she isn't. While Mark and Susan discussing his private practice interview, they receive an urgent call to the ER. Truly, unlike any other case they've seen, they see one of their own, Nurse Hathaway, being wheeled in a gurney for medication overdose. This scene shows Green's effectiveness as an authority figure and how he manages to calm the ER staff down while they're in total distress. As Hathaway stabilizes, Dr. Morgenstern, the head of the ER, gives some wise words to Green.
She was one of those. We loved her. We worked with her. And some things happened to her. It makes us feel guilty. It makes us feel angry. It scares the hell out of us. But we take care of her. And the world will rounds. You set the tone.
Green comforts Ross as he feels guilty about Hathaway's attempted suicide due to the fact that the relationship ended badly, but Green mentions how it's most likely a lot more than that. A while later, the ER staff retrieves stab victim. Carter gets nauseated from the side of the stab wound and goes outside the building for air. Green consults Carter and gives him some wise words of his own. He even sneaks in a diss towards Benton. Ross treats his baby with several bruises who was brought in by his babysitter. Ross suspects child abuse from the babysitter and bites her head off. This is where we get to see Doug's more aggressive and passionate personality, as he clearly cares a lot about his patient's safety. Benton sees a patient with pretty severe internal bleeding and requires immediate surgery. Benton decides to do the procedure himself despite the bleeding resident because there's not another surgical team available to do so. He begins the procedure by making an incision on holding down a source of the bleed. Shortly after, Morgenstern comes and takes over. He criticizes his incision but thanks him for making the right call. As Benton walks away, we get to see one of the most iconic scenes in ER, the Benton punch. Ross confronts the mother with evidence of abuse from the babysitter. Benton tells the surgical patient's wife that they're doing fine, Carter sutures up his last patient, and they all find places to sleep as their shift ends. Green sleeps in his exam room, but is shortly after woken up for another day in the ER. How nice. Episode 2, Day 1. This episode starts off a similar way to how the pilot started, except Dr. Green is replaced by Dr. Lewis.
The baby.
The baby.
In respiratory arrest.
She treats a baby choking on a small object stuck in his throat.
An errand.
Later, our team of doctors pick up the patient from the helicopter and bring them down to the hospital for treatment. During this, Carter's patient goes into VTAC and calls for help. This is where we get to see Carter's initiative.
Mr. Zampano!
Mark and Dogg have a chat about how Hathaway went back home and how Dogg makes attempts to visit her with no success. Mark helps give him courage.
Take her some flowers. You don't have to stay long. It's not your fault, Doug. You gotta forgive yourself sooner or later.
Soon after, Benton asks Carter for a medical assessment from a patient that he examined. This scene right here genuinely made me laugh.
Dr. Carter, what would you do?
In view of his history of constipation, the diffuse nature of the pain, I'd order a CBC, Chem 7, UA amylase, and a KUB.
And if they're normal?
Not discharge him. Let him follow up with his personal physician.
Yeah. Congratulations. You just cost this hospital a $2 million malpractice settlement.
Mark's wife tells him that she passed the bar exam after completing law school, and sure enough, they go to celebrate. They get called by a good chunk of the ER staff, and Mark gets clowned for it. Mark takes care of an elderly woman with respiratory problems. Despite the fact that she's DNR, do not resuscitate, her husband insists and begs that the doctors do everything they can to keep her alive.
Please, do everything you can.
We're gonna get blood gases first, and then we'll take it from there, okay?
Okay.
Dr. Lewis argues over the care of a senile patient with a psychiatric resident known as Dr. Savetic. He tells Susan that the patient doesn't need a bed. Despite what I talked about earlier, she does a pretty good job asserting herself in the scenes with him.
He was found naked, wandering down Halsted
He's
Street.
senile, not psychotic.
He needs full-time care.
Admit him to your service. Don't turf him to mine.
I tried to. Wirtz wouldn't let me.
Mark talks with his wife about how he doesn't want to leave the hospital, despite the long, stress-filled schedules. This builds up tension between them that spans throughout the whole season. But let's get back to good old Carter here. Earlier, he examined a patient and attempted to seduce him. As Carter's shift ends and he starts his car, this happens.
Hi.
Hi. How did you get...
So let's go.
Where?
Your place.
I live with my folks.
My place, then.
Dogg finally builds up the courage to visit Carol and he gives her some flowers. I really like the scenes between Dogg and Carol, mainly because this beautiful piano score plays. What will be later known as the Dogg and Carol theme. You might have heard it being used earlier. In fact, not to go off topic, but the soundtrack in general in the early seasons is just amazing. It's energetic, atmospheric, and really sets the tone for the scenes they're in. The music is composed by James Newton Howard, who's also done composites from Liar Liar, Space Jam, The Dark Knight, and the Hunger Games series of films. Episode 3, Going Home. The episode starts off with Hathaway returning back to work a few days after her suicide attempt. Her mother is initially doubtful, but Carol says that she's ready.
You don't have to go today.
I want to.
If you're not ready, no one will mind.
I know, but I am ready, Mama. It's all right. Don't worry.
Meanwhile in the ER, a mysterious patient is brought in who sings extremely loudly. Good to know. Also, fun fact, the actress who plays her is actually the aunt of Doug Ross's actor, George Clooney. So, yeah.
Nice and easy does it. Nice and easy does it every time.
Hathaway gets reacquainted into her friends and co-workers and they crack a few jokes.
Jerry, you're killing me.
Hey, nothing you haven't tried already, huh?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Doug is harping onto the ER stuff about how they should be more sensitive considering what just happened.
I just think we need to be a little sensitive here.
First day back?
While Carol's getting back into the working routine, Carter takes cover of a mysterious woman who just started randomly crying.
Ma'am? Are you okay? I mean, I can see that you're not okay.
Lewis deals with the patient and one of the more senior doctors argue with her about treatment. In this scene, she has a lot more trouble putting up a front.
I felt drug therapy was indicated.
Did you think angioplasty wasn't?
No, of course not, but
Well,
since...
I favor a more aggressive approach.
That's one opinion. I chose drugs. They're less invasive.
Dr. Lewis, Mr. Flanagan is my patient. You're a resident. All decisions concerning his care will be made by me. Call the cath lab. Tell him we're on our way up.
While the doctors take another patient from a helicopter, Benton continues to give good old Carter a hard time.
Carter, move! Go! Get the door! Go! Go ahead! Go!
Susan treats an elderly patient who came in for a cut, but her blood tests are positive for leukemia.
Mrs. Packer, without transfusion of blood components, you're susceptible to infection, bleeding, possibly even a heart attack.
I know all about it, Doctor. I've been dealing with this for quite some time. And time is something that I don't have a great deal of anymore. I'd rather not spend it in the hospital. Now, if I could just get a few stitches.
Okay. We'll have someone in here in a minute, all right?
And Carter nearly fucks a patient in the hospital.
You know what they say in med school? S1, S2, S3, S4. Keep the pelvis off the floor.
Anyway, the doctors discuss in the medical board about Dr. Lewis's treatment of a patient. They argue that she should have used angioplasty, a more invasive surgical approach, including a good old friend Dr. Green. Later, they argue about it.
Why do I feel like a traitor? You know, it wasn't personal.
I'm dying out there, and you're siding with the slicers and dicers. Benton, Langworthy, they're all surgeons. All they ever want to do is cut people open.
That may be a little bit of an exaggeration.
The patient was fine with a dose of TPA versus a $10,000 surgical procedure. My decision was valid. You should have backed me up.
Throughout the episode, Dr. Green treated a boy and his mother. His mother suffered an injury to the eye for falling down the stairs. I'm sure you all know where this is going. Later, the boy, Mr. Green, and his father head out on purpose. He calls social services, but by then the father arrives to pick up his wife and son. The social services are unconvinced because the mother and son wouldn't admit to them that the father's an abuser.
Has your father ever hit you, Frank? Frank, did your father hit your mom?
Benton deals with the convenience store clerk who is injured by someone robbing his store. He insists he's going to protect himself in the store with arms the next time that happens.
Maybe I should buy a gun. Never wanted one around, but what I am supposed to do?
Dogg finally has a proper conversation with Carol when he talks about his guilty conscience.
You're standing there like a puppy with its tail between its legs because you feel guilty.
No, I don't. I do, but that's not what this is about.
Yes, it is. You think you had something to do with my swallowing a whole bunch of pills. Well, you didn't. There were actually more depressing events in my life than you.
Carol's given a call saying that Mark's hurt, however the ER surprises her with a welcome home party. Kinda pogged, not gonna lie. Episode 4, Hit and Run. Carter gets rudely awakened by Benton for a shift.
Carter, get up. Let's go. Where's your page? I've been beeping you for 5 minutes.
And Dogg and Mark talk about misogyny.
Life so far away, and other more immediate temptations so close.
You haven't the faintest idea what you're talking
I know
about.
exactly what I'm talking about.
Dogg sees a kid with supposed hearing problems. The mother complains about her son can't hear the voices that she hears. The scene actually startled me a bit when I first watched it because I wasn't expecting it.
Did you leave the money there? Oh, that's what you sound like!
The doctors fail to save a patient in the ER and Carter witnesses his first patient die. It clearly affects him.
We lose them all the time, Carter.
Benton and another surgical resident clash about the treatment of a patient. Just like surgeons do, I guess.
Wait a minute, who gave you permission to assign duties to my student?
I didn't know you owned Mr. Carter. I thought he was assigned to the surgical service.
Yeah, well, he isn't.
Are you saying he's unavailable to me?
I'm saying next time you ask.
The schizo mother starts to act up after she hears she's been taken to a psych ward, and the doctors struggle to stabilize her. I found this particular scene when we first see Peter's brother interesting, because it's the first time we see Peter actually act like a normal human.
Hey, Walt, what's up, man?
What's up? Walked in the first row near the dumpsters.
Oh, yeah? So was the transmission, huh?
That sucker was shot.
There's some dude treated by Dr. Lewis who talks on the phone all day, and then it causes a magnetic superpower effect, I don't know.
Hello! I'm sorry, I can't hear you. Who? Louise. Yeah, did you get the rate card I faxed over? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. It's kind of noisy here. Hey, you want on this week? You got him. Sir, hang up that phone. What? Hang up that phone now. You okay?
A man handcuffed to another woman come in as patients, which is just absolutely terrific. They get their handcuffs broken up by some shears, cause the female patient's name is Miss Shearer. But yeah, the male patient's wife finds out and that's that. Anyway, Carter finds out some background information on his patient that he witnessed die, so he decided to get in contact with their family. That sounded very soulless of me, Jesus Christ. Carter and Benton bring them in, and Carter soon finds out that he's made the worst mistake possible.
This isn't our son.
Semi-side note, you'll notice that Benton constantly berates Carter every moment he can, but the way Benton looks at Carter in this scene is very different from before. While he's been disappointed in him before for the mistakes he made, he has a genuine look of disheartenedness and even revolt on his face. Carter has truly fucked up. And Benton truly fucked up in his own way, as he forgot to visit his family while working on a patient. His brother berates him for it.
No, don't hand me that OR crap. I already know how important your work is compared to the small events of my life.
Carter has an existential crisis while talking to Jerry, the desk clerk. He beats himself up for the mistake he made earlier and questions his reasoning for wanting to be a doctor. But then this happens.
What kind of drugs is that guy on? Help! My wife is having a baby!
This episode ends up by Dogg trying to woo Carol back. It goes pretty much as well as you'd expect.
What could you possibly have been thinking would happen tonight? That you would come to my doorstep at midnight drunk? And I would find that as some sort of grand gesture of love? Is that what you were thinking? That you can just show up? And I'll invite you back in my life, in my bed? Is that what you imagined would happen tonight?
I don't know.
You have no right to even think about doing this.
I'm sorry.
Do you think that you love me? Huh? For how long, Doug? How long? Till you start wondering if there isn't someone better in the next room or the next bar? How long till that little voice in your head starts reminding you of all the infinite 22-year-olds you could be screwing tomorrow, or the next day, or the next? I will not let you do this to me again.
Episode 5, Into That Good Night. One of the main highlights of this episode is the fact that Mark's wife may be moving to Milwaukee for a job offer. This is a problem for Green as he prefers working in Chicago. This conflict starts to shake up their marriage even further.
I made a lot of compromises, Mark.
Carter asks for advice from Dr. Ross about what he should do with a patient who has a burning peeing sensation.
If a patient has like a burning sensation, does he necessarily have a
sexually transmitted disease? Yeah, he probably does. You have to do a culture. You ever do that?
No.
No. Okay. First, you got to do a chlamydia prep, and then you have to do a gram stain, gonorrhea. Stick this bad boy in about 1/4 of an inch, and then you spin it around about 10 times.
10 times?
Mm-hmm.
There's also this dude who keeps passing out in the trauma room.
He's in fib.
Charging. Ready? 200.
Clear. Another 50 of lidocaine. Start a drip. 2 grams and 500.
Wow. I don't usually do that.
The doctors discuss about Mark's wife moved to Milwaukee and how they don't think Mark will be happy there. Except for Benton, who is out here vibing to music.
What are you listening to?
Snoop, Doggy, Dogg.
The patient from earlier gives some advice to Mark.
How's your heart?
Pretty good shape.
Want to lend it to me for the weekend? Nah. You got better things to do with it. Do them all. You never know when you'll get the chance.
Huh?
Bend over. There we go.
Dr. Ross deals with the young girl with breathing problems. He tells her mother to write a prescription in the pharmacy to get an inhaler as well as some other stuff. Later, she comes back to the hospital having an asthma attack. Ross gets angry at the mother having found out that she didn't get the inhaler. Turns out she just simply couldn't afford it.
The medicine costs $30. I don't have the money and Medicaid don't come through for another week.
Later, Carter gets a culture results for his patient and he finds on the bulletin board. But it turns out that Carter got cucked.
You gotta do something. I feel like I'm gonna throw up.
Well, we wouldn't want that. Out here in the hall. Come with me.
Hi, John.
The other patient says his last goodbyes to his daughter as he comes close to passing away. Keep in mind, the scene is shown right after the Carter cuck scene, a statement on how the show can go from comedic to serious, just like that. Represents how fast-paced the show is, just like the life of emergency doctors. In the end, Mark reconciles with his wife.
I love you.
Daddy, you're home.
Hi, sweetheart. Come on in.
Episode 6, Chicago Heat. It's a hot day in Chicago as there's a big-ass fan in the desk area. Mark's daughter, Rachel, comes with Mark to work while her mother is out apartment hunting in Milwaukee. That's gonna fuck Rachel up. We get to see more into Susan's personal life. Her sister Chloe visits, who has a lot of social problems to her name. Drugs, alcohol, money, you name it. She asks her sister Susan if she can stay over at her place for a bit as she has nowhere else to go.
I lost my apartment.
What happened to the money I sent you?
Wasn't enough.
$500? I can't do this right now.
No, please.
No, Chloe, not this time.
Mom won't let me stay at the house.
I can't, really.
It's just for a couple weeks.
Weeks?
Days then, okay? I promise this time I won't screw up. I won't.
Oh, remember that engine store clerk from earlier? Well, he got his wish and they bring in a young robber who was shot by him. I really like how to deal with this character. He went from being angry at Robert and swearing vengeance, even going as far as to mock him when he was brought to the hospital.
I got him. That's the one. The one who shoots me? Now I shoot him. Now I shot you. Huh? See how it feels? Huh? You little bastard. Now you see.
To regretting the shooting and caring for the young robber.
I was very scared. I stay. See how he do, okay?
I like it because it isn't presented as black and white. I mean, yeah, the boy is unarmed and he shouldn't have shot him, but he's been screwed over so many times in his convenience store he just got sick of it. And sure, he was angry, but I could easily tell by his Dogg and mannerisms even during a few episodes ago that he was also scared. He felt put into a corner and didn't know what else to do. He was sick of being Mr. Nice Guy, and he clearly wants to do everything he can to make things better. I'm certain it wasn't his intent to kill the boy, which it turned out that he unfortunately did. I love the fact that they made a very minor character who only appears in a couple episodes as complex as he is. You can even say unironically starts a conversation. Anyway, tensions rise between Ross and Hathaway's boyfriend Tag. He sees him kiss and he gets sad. Boo-hoo, yada yada yada. A young girl comes in who's been poisoned. Later, it's revealed that she ingested cocaine. Dr. Ross suspected she took it from her father and that he's selling drugs.
He says it wasn't him, that he doesn't know where Kenesha could have gotten cocaine.
And you believe him?
Did you call the police?
What for?
Child endangerment.
He's middle class, he owns a home, he has a job. I got families of 10 living out of 67 Buicks.
You could be a coke dealer.
The episode ends with Susan finding out her sister from before stole her fucking TV and VCR. Bruh. And the clerk gets arrested for the killing of the young robber.
Ivan. I'm sorry.
Episode 7. Another Perfect Day.
Hello? No, this isn't ER, this is Patrick.
Mark's wife, Jennifer, visits Mark in Chicago, but only for a short while.
I called the hospital and told them that you're too busy having sex with your wife.
Dr. Lewis and Nurse Hathaway treat a patient called Patrick. He's a pretty sweet lad.
Go like this. Oh, knock, knock.
Who's there?
Patrick.
Patrick who?
Me? Patrick.
Speaking of Dr. Lewis, it's her birthday and she's celebrating it in the ER. But Dr. Woe is Me decides to announce the fact to the entire ER staff that they're going to Alpha Dinner to celebrate.
So everyone knows?
Knows what? That it's your birthday today and he's taking you out for dinner tonight and asked you to wear that black dress?
Oh my God, what'd you do? Put it in the newsletter?
The bulletin board. Just kidding.
I will kill him after dinner.
Later, Dr. Woe is Me argues with the nurse Malik for annoying him.
I've had 5 admissions today. 2 attempted suicides, 2 bipolars who forgot to take their lithium, and a 40-year-old who walks in off the street claiming to be dead, all before lunch.
After a pretty stressful trauma, Dogg and Carol decide to kiss. Pretty passionately. Wow, that's America for you. Nurse Hawaii comes to heads with Dr. Benton after he refuses to be a role model for gangbanger patient, whom she's known since he was 4.
And what am I supposed to be, the Big Brothers program or something? I'm supposed to turn every gang kid that comes in here into some kind of Nelson Mandela or something?
Now, I know you'd never do that, Peter. That's why I never asked you before.
Speaking of the patient, Carter treats him and does his first spinal tap.
Advance it slowly between the vertebrae. Then you'll feel a slight pop.
Benton and the other surgical residents start to get along a lot more.
Sir, the operation was a success.
But it was the wrong leg.
Eventually, he gets called in for an interview for surgical fellowship. When I first saw the scene, I thought it was funny how Benton acts so awkwardly here, mainly because it's a far cry from Benton's usual cocky persona. I guess this is where we get to see the real Benton.
Back in medical school, anything more recent?
No,
Hawaii eventually forces Benton to be the supervisor of the Gangbang Kids city internship that he's taken for his suspended sentence.
I put you down as his supervisor.
A very drunk Chloe visits the ER to wish Susan a happy birthday.
Everybody, come on. Happy birthday, you live in a zoo.
Susan bites Chloe's head off for the scene she caused, the fact that she's drunk and probably on drugs, and that she stole her TV. Chloe ends up shouting about how hard she had it, and then goes full on Joker mode. And Carol dashes away the tiniest glimpse of hope from Dogg of them getting back together by telling them that she's moving back in with Tag.
And did you decide this afternoon?
We've been talking about it for a while.
But did you decide to tell him this afternoon, or are you just telling me now?
It doesn't matter, Doug.
What happened with us this afternoon? Does that matter?
What happened today was an accident.
There are no accidents.
Susan and Carter share some good old champagne, and then the episode ends.
Woo! Whoa! Ah!
Nice.
Episode 8. 9.5 hours. Mark stays off work to have sex with his wife. Season 1, Episode 8. Now, Dr. Ross takes over for him and has a hard time with the amount of paperwork he has to deal with. Dr. Woe Is Me lashes out at everyone at work due to him being more stressed for some reason. Susan tries to calm him down, but to no avail.
All right, I promise I'll never snap at a desk clerk again, okay?
This morning it was the cashier at Starbucks.
I don't know.
What is wrong?
Well, what's wrong is that you're wasting my time, and I'm late for rounds.
Carol deals with a rape victim. This storyline is dealt with sensitivity, as is very emotional and personal. A lot of dramas nowadays tend to trivialize such subject matters by just using it as a dramatic plot point to heighten the stakes. Later in the episode, she leaves the hospital before being questioned by the police. She explains to Carol that she has nowhere to go because her boyfriend doesn't believe her and starts breaking down. Carol then comforts her and brings her back to the hospital. Benton finds out that he lost a fellowship opportunity and decides to take it out on Carter by not letting him do surgeries and instead doing scut work.
I thought you might let me go with you. Mesocaval shunt. I had to learn, and maybe I could help.
Yeah? Well, I asked you to look after my mother.
And I could have a nurse do that. You said yourself it was only a sprain.
Yeah, well, I want you to clean those lacks in two and stitch them up. And see if my mother needs anything to eat. She doesn't eat enough. Go, let's move.
He's also given his fellow surgical resident Dr. Langworthy a hard time because she was the one who won the fellowship opportunity. She notices this and boils it down to repressed sexual tension, because, you know, that makes sense.
Not only don't I want to sleep with you, I've never even fantasized about it. Obviously, you have.
Dr. Benton and Dr. Ross clash while treating Kid in one of the trauma rooms, and they later argue about it.
You lose a fellowship, so you have to prove something. Dr. Benton, otherwise known as God.
You couldn't get the tube in.
I had plenty of time to crank in myself.
Oh, yeah, another 90 seconds. That kid's brain would have been mush.
Exactly right. 90 seconds, and it's my choice.
Oh, yeah, well, the kid's alive,
He's
isn't
my patient.
Oh, so it's okay if he dies, right?
Oh, so you're the only person that can keep him alive.
A new ER aide nicknamed Bob is introduced. She's pretty sweet. Episode 9. ER Confidential. The episode starts off with Edgy McKedgy talking to himself about how utterly depressed he is.
You find yourself searching for ways not to hate them. You know, little tricks like, she shares a birthday with your mother, or he looks like the brother of a friend. It doesn't work. You feel nothing. Every drop of pleasure has drained from your life.
Shit, this is in 1994, I can't imagine how I'd handle 2020. County General celebrates Halloween this episode. Or do they? I'm genuinely not sure.
What's your name?
Okay, it was released in November 17th. Carter and Benton treat a woman named Mrs. Carlton with lacerations around her body. While examining her, Benton finds something he wasn't expecting.
Bruises along the coccyx.
Could somebody please get me a gown?
Later in the episode, Carter is seen suturing her head laceration. Carter decides to give Mrs. Carlton more as a silent treatment after being shook up by the fact that she was trans. She notices this and tells her life story.
I had a friend once. We would go to lunch, happy hours, shopping. Over drinks one night, I told her about myself. She stood up, left the table, and never spoke to me again. I used to feel those things made me stronger, more sure of who I was. These days, I spend 3 hours putting on my face before I dare go outside, plucking and waxing. And even then, someone always notices. I can see by the look in their eyes. The disgust. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am disgusting.
Sad news reveal that Carter's indifferent attitude is what tipped her over the edge. Carter begs for Carlton not to jump off the building, but she laughs and does it anyway.
No, don't!
Now, this is another example of how well the show deals with sensitive topics, and shows to be even ahead of its time with the way it discussed transgender issues. Most shows in the 90s, mostly sitcoms, poked fun at trans people. However, ER turns this into a very real situation, and I'm sure can very well be relatable to many trans people. Carter talks about always getting noticed as not being a real woman, despite how much effort she puts into making herself look more womanlike. Carter even tells about how her father told her on his own deathbed that, "You'll always be my son." And that got me. Imagine your father's last words completely invalidating who you are and what you want to be. That's fucking soul-crushing. And Carter's overall attitude in the situation was a final straw for her. Now, look, I'm not saying Carter's transphobic. I just think he's very ignorant, and him being a sheltered, rich, white male doesn't really help his case. Oh yeah, he comes from an extremely rich family, I forgot to mention. No wonder Carlton laughed at him before she jumped off, cause it was only then on the brink of her death that Carter decided to actually give a shit about her. And it's not even that good, like, he refers her to a therapist who's probably given even less of a shit than Carter is, but nonetheless I do think it's important that this side of Carter was shown, because this incident clearly shook him up and he learns to be more empathetic towards the patients later down the line. Okay, where were we? Susan asks Mark for advice on how to deal with her depressive boyfriend. Mark says he needs psychiatric help and that he shouldn't be working on patients if his condition's hindering them that bad.
He's clinically depressed. He needs psychiatric help.
I know, but I don't want to back him into a corner if he's not ready.
Well, someone's got to say something. I mean, if he's really that bad, he shouldn't be treating patients.
You know, your concern for Dib is really touching. Thanks for the advice.
I just think he should see someone.
I got that.
Dogg treats an animal rights activist who accidentally killed a turkey after being attacked by it during his attempt to save it. He's a bit of an oddball, I'm not gonna lie.
Oh my God. Could you please shut the blind?
Susan tries to deal with an abusive patient.
What, are you deaf too? I said shove it, you little pinhead puke.
But don't worry, she gets back at him. Carol deals with a patient who admits to her that he, and not his friend, ran a red light and killed a pedestrian. Carol convinces the patient that despite her knowing how guilty he feels, he has to come clean and this is unfair for the grieving family of the victim.
I've kept things from people, and it makes you hate yourself. It makes it hard to live with yourself.
Ever kill anyone before?
No. But I've done things to hurt people. People close to me.
And you told him?
Not everything, no.
It's not so easy. Is it?
Around the end of the episode, Carol admits to her boyfriend Tag about the events of a couple episodes ago where Dogg kissed him. And Tag gets pretty fucking mad.
Just because you're trying to kill yourself, I'm supposed to sit back and smile while you screw your old boyfriend? What more do you want from me, Carol? I've been patient, I've been faithful. Should I treat you like garbage like Doug Ross does? Is that what you want?
No.
Dr. Langworthy helps Benton with a complex procedure and their friendship grows more.
It was a great save. I'll see you in the spring.
Benton counsels Carter, who's feeling guilty about the patient that committed suicide. Benton admits that he is the one most responsible for this happening as he didn't recognize the signs earlier.
She came in here because she crashed her car into a bridge. Now, I should have recognized that as a suicide attempt, but I didn't. So next time, we'll both be more attentive.
Susan celebrates Thanksgiving with her sister and her sister's boyfriend, but Div, who promised to show up, didn't. Instead, he's just vibing in the middle of a packed carriageway. Episode 10, Blizzard. It's a snowy day in the winter of Chicago. You can even say starting to look like a blizzard. Funny. Anyway, it's an otherwise quiet day in the ER where there seems to be no patients around. As a result, the ER staff seizes this opportunity to muck about. Mark and Susan prank Carter by putting a cast on his leg. Susan simps over Carter and they both end up calling Carter via the hospital speakers. One of the nurses spits some epic bars while the rest of the staff play chair football. I'm sorry, soccer. Fun fact, I'm pretty sure the actor the nurse who's rapping is actually rapper himself. Like, he's got fucking albums and everything. Maybe this was just a sneaky way to show off his game. Carol shows off her engagement ring that her boyfriend Tag gave to her, and Carol gives no fucks about telling her ex Dogg as well. After what I assume a few hours pass, County General finally gets a call saying that they're treating victims of 15-car pileup with around 50 to 100 casualties. Perfect case of the calm before the storm. Also, now I've gushed over this show enough, wanted you to watch the scene where the staff are praying for the casualties before they come in its entirety. Ironically, the ER is having trouble dealing with the absolute quantity of patients, obviously a stark contrast from earlier. Good news though, Patrick returns, and he turns on some sick jams for the staff to listen to while they're working on critical and dying patients. The patient's in critical condition and there are only nurses working on him since all the doctors are busy. Bob, the new ER aide, does something incredibly surprising. She talks to Carter and reveals that she was a vascular surgeon in her country. She's now afraid that since she operated on somebody without being a licensed doctor in America, she'll never have a chance of actually being one. Carter ends up reassuring her. And Dr. Green helps a patient give birth to a baby via radio. Episode 11. The Gift. It's Christmas in '94 and Carter wakes Santa up. Carter wants to treat him, but he leaves abruptly.
I'm feeling a lot better. Thanks, young man. Thanks anyway.
First off, the doctors end up reviving a 6-year-old after almost drowning while ice fishing with his father.
So you're gonna back up, sir. Get him out of here. Get him out.
You gotta come with me.
Sir, you're gonna have to wait back here. You're gonna have to wait back here.
Stay right here.
Susan treats a man electrocuted by Christmas lights while trying to put them up. Maybe the Grinch is real after all.
My wife said I should charge admission this year. I said no. I mean, we take and we take. Well, you should give something back, you know. Bring some joy to the neighborhood.
I'm sure it's beautiful, Mr. Kaminsky.
Beautiful. No, it was breathtaking.
It's my party.
And she'll
cry if she
wants to. Cry if she wants to. Cry if she wants to.
You would cry true if it happened to you.
Give her 5 Hal doll.
Benton tries to save the organs of a brain-dead patient. Despite the fact that the patient's wife hasn't yet consented to the availability of the organs, Benton decides to publicize it anyway out of the fear that the organs will die out. This is one of the several examples of Benton's lack of empathy during the earlier seasons, as yes, this patient is brain-dead, and yes, there is little or no chance of meaningful recovery. However, he should have considered the amount of psychological damage he gave to his wife donating her husband's organs without her consent or knowledge. Anyway, some worse news. Patrick comes back with a head laceration after losing his helmet.
Fuck, man.
After his head lac is treated, Carol gives Patrick a new helmet and allows him to stay at the hospital for a while longer.
Do you want to stay here for a while?
Benton's plan of donating his brain-dead patient's organs backfires on him when a wife appears and still clings on to the possibility of him recovering. Oh wow, didn't see that coming.
There's absolutely no possibility of your husband ever recovering.
Well, I want a second opinion.
Look, I know. He looks like he's alive. But the only reason he's hooked up to this ventilator is to keep his heart pumping.
I want a second opinion.
A familiar face returns to the ER.
Miss Kavanaugh.
Than I myself. I'm by myself alone.
New attending surgeon Dr. Angela Hicks has a few words to say to Benton about making his patient's organs publicized without his wife's consent.
You've got 8 transplant surgeons flying into this hospital with patients and their families waiting at the other end. If we can't harvest, what are you going to tell these people?
An old woman tells Dogg about her sad love story.
40 years ago, a young man proposed to me, and I said no. It was the biggest mistake of my life.
Why'd you say no?
He was Jewish. My parents didn't approve. And last year, after my mother died, I found his letters. She'd kept them hidden from me. He wanted to know why I wouldn't answer his letters, why I stopped loving him. He lived in Tulsa, so I got his number and I called him. And a beautiful voice that I hadn't heard in 40 years answered. It was his son. Sammy died 3 years ago.
Later, we see the same Santa left to come back unconscious. He goes into a heart attack.
He's in arrest. Malik, give him an amphibepi.
Dr. Green talks to the wife of Benton's patient, who hasn't signed a consent form to donate his organs yet. Turns out she's been separated from her husband for a while, and right before he went to the hospital, he tried to patch things up with her. Later, she ends up signing the form. Susan tries to contact her boyfriend Div, only to find out that he quit his job. He then asks Carter for a ride to Div's place.
When do you get off?
Just signed out.
Would you do me a favor?
Sure.
Can I have a ride?
Doug is still hung up over Carol, but Mark encourages him not to give up.
She's not married yet.
Susan visits Div's apartment upon the unfortunate realization that he moved out, and is shot like a fucking horror movie. Later, Carter drops Susan off at her own apartment, but not before nearly playing tongue tonsil wars with her. I say nearly because she rejects his advance, likely due to him being a med student. Also, I just realized how tall Carter is. Fucking hell, he's almost as tall as Staker. Susan and her sister Chloe celebrate Christmas together. While opening each other's presents, Chloe reveals that she's pregnant. Oh dear. Doug, being the big brain genius that he is, decides to crash his ex's engagement party in the hopes that he woos her back. That goes as expected.
Go home, Doug.
I love you.
You have some old idea of me.
And you love me.
No, I don't.
Yes, you do.
No, I don't.
You haven't changed, Doug, and the sad thing is you don't even know it.
All right, then I will change.
I am not asking you to
Carol,
change.
listen to me.
I don't want to listen to you. I don't want you, Doug. Leave me alone.
Carol tells him to fuck off, and Tad gives his face a good old biff. Merry Christmas. I'm gonna leave this video there. This is gonna be separated into parts. Originally, the script was supposed to cover all 25 episodes, but again, as I said, I'm gonna decide to cut off in parts. And I think cutting it off in a Christmas episode is pretty fitting, considering, you know, it's fucking Christmas and all. As of recording, we're currently in lockdown, the third lockdown in the UK, because the past two lockdowns, they worked so fucking well. And obviously that means Christmas is cancelled. Family, which means no one can visit each other for Christmas, no extended family. Do you really think people are gonna listen? I don't think so, man. Fuck, just... anyway, thank you for watching. I know this video is very different. I mean, sorry if that's not your type of thing, because I know not a lot of people have heard of ER or probably not interested in this type of like medical drama shit. It's just something that I wanted to talk about, and if you are interested in it, then better for you, right? I just want to get this show out there because I don't think a lot of people have talked about it. I mean, at least on the internet, I guess. But yeah, I think I mainly also want to talk about it because, not just because of how good of a show it is, but also because, I mean, the decline in the later seasons and how I find that to be interesting, and how the show kind of went down into a mediocre fucking Grey's Anatomy clone. So I can't wait for those, actually. But yeah, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, all that good shit. Don't piss on the subscribe button. I don't know why I even thought that, but yeah. Men bad, abolish anarchy, and goodbye, guys.
1, yep, 3. SC and double OP, D go double G. I can't fake it, just break it. And when I take it, see, I specialize in making all the girls get naked. So bring your friends, all of y'all come inside. We got a world premiere right here, now get live.
Jesus fucking Christ, the script was so long.